Hello and welcome to the very first episode of IndieFilmopolis. I'm Mike Baughan, an actor and producer.
And I'm Philip Pugh, a writer and director.
And this is a brand new podcast about our endeavours in trying to make low and no budget indie films. We'll also include a lot of our thoughts, reviews and general love for other independently made films. Some you may know very well and some not so much.
So our initial motivation for wanting to do this podcast is for our amazing and very patient Indiegogo supporters who very generously backed our feature film Almost Enemy about 5 years ago. It's been a while.
Long old haul.
Yeah. So this is mostly going at you. Hello. Thanks for your patience. Really, we wanted to do a more personalised update for you guys because every month we've been trying to put out a written update on Indiegogo, but all I've been able to say, because we're in the throes of post-production, is, well, we're still editing. Yeah. So
yeah, I hope these podcasts will keep you more up to date with what we're doing, and to also let you know that we're thinking about you. Want to give you as much info and background to Own Worst Enemy as possible, because we really do appreciate your support and patience.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you're a fan of indie film and indie filmmaking and you've stumbled across this podcast, hello to you as well.
hello.
Hopefully we'll be able to give you some interesting insights into how we made a very low budget feature, as well as some interesting discussions about other indie films that we like and dislike.
Yeah.
Hopefully you've heard of them, hopefully some you won't.
Yeah. If you don't know them, then great. I might be inspired to check them out.
So we're going to go and try and have a loose theme with each of these podcasts. Well, to begin with, we're going to start talking about the making of Own Worst Enemy. We're going to go through from the first conception of the film right through to pre-production, filming pickups, post-production, all that sort of stuff. And once we get it to the festival circuit, we'll be able to offer up our experiences of screening our film to an audience as well.
So yeah, this first episode we're going to concentrate on the conception of Own Worst Enemy and the writing process of the script, and then later on, like Mike said, we'll have a theme for each one. So we'll talk about some of our favourite indie scripts and some of the ones that we maybe don't like so much or we're a bit kind of disappointed by. But before we jump into all of that, Mike, for those who may not know, what's Own Worst Enemy all about?
Yes, for those just joining and not quite aware of the film that we're making, Own Worst Enemy is a British-made pitch black comedy written and directed by Phil here. It's about a very strange individual called Andy and a figment of his imagination, Mr. P, who I play, both of them. Both stuck in Andy's house. Andy's very housebound. He's got a very 70s feel. He doesn't seem to see much of the world, and he's in there of reasons of his own making. Because of the agoraphobic nature of his place, it highlights his paranoia and delusions. Thrown into the mix, he has to contend with a very sort of chavvy helper called Perry. Played by the Australian actor Matthew Waters,
who does a great Cockney.
Oh, he does a very good Cockney. The TV weather person, played by Terry Dwyer, who Andy believes is deliberately predicting bad weather to get at him because he's got a leaky roof, and of course he can't leave the house to fix the leaky roof because of all these issues.
We should have done a scene with him trying to get on the roof.
Yeah, health and safety wouldn't. Well, yeah, you wouldn't leave him health and safety. But Andy's main problem is his own worst enemy, Mr. P, his imaginary friend. And Mr. P's imaginary friend, Paul. So Andy's imaginary friend has another imaginary friend, and both of these imaginary friends hate him. And do whatever they can do to turn his life into a horror movie of some sort.
And they're quite emphatic that they're not his friend.
Oh, yes, despite the fact we've used imaginary friend to describe them. We have a nice few cameos as well, including from Big Joe Egan of the Sherlock Holmes film fame, and James and Oliver Phelps, who are better known as the Weasley twins from the Harry Potter films. The main film itself, as you can imagine, pretty much takes place all indoors in one central location that we were lucky enough to find, and was made for, what would you say, less than £25,000 in total.
Ultra low.
Excellent. Budget, so it's a nice low budget indie all the way through. We filmed Unworst Enemy, it's 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
But before we go into the process of the conception of the film and things like that, it's probably best to update people with the current progress of Unworst Enemy and why it's still in post-production.
Obviously, we never thought it was going to take this long. I think probably, but we were hoping 18 months down the line we would have a finished film. But a lot of the reasons why it's taken so long is we had a huge amount of footage from the shoot, much more than is kind of reasonable for a film of this budget, and probably for any sort of indie film really. A big part of the reasons why we ended up with so much footage was 70 to 75% of the film is you acting against you, and when you're doing that, there's no shortcuts. Usually when you're making any kind of film, but even particularly an indie film, if you've got like a short 1-2 minute scene with two people and it's just a conversation, you'd find a way to stage that. You'd probably try and do a 2-shot or a wide shot, get the scene done, do a little bit of coverage, move on. With Unworst Enemy, we had no choice but to do a lot of coverage because obviously we had to do Mike's side of the conversation several times and then the other side. There was no scenes within that sort of 70 to 75% of Mike acting against Mike where we could just go, okay, we've got half an hour to shoot this scene, let's just set up a 2-shot, knock it out of the park, move on. We just didn't have that luxury, I guess, which I guess we kind of knew was going to happen, but Mr. P is within the script, within the film, is a very dominant character.
Yeah, and is a character I quite find compared to other characters, a little easier to play.
Sure, yeah.
Andy, on the other hand.
Yeah. And so it wasn't just a case of Andy being more of a kind of a distant character for you, it was also the fact that if we'd done, say, Mr. P's side of the conversation for 2 or 3 scenes, which is what we do, if we had like a similar setup for 2 or 3 scenes, so Mr. P on the couch, we'd film 3 scenes, Mr. P's side, all at once, and then we'd go and do Andy's scenes, say he was standing in the doorway perhaps. So if Mike's been Mr. P all morning, like I said, he's a very dominant character within the film, but also what happened was in real life, he sort of possessed Mike in a way, and it was really it took a while to sort of exercise Mr. P out of Mike's performance to get Andy, so like I said, so we'd have like a normal amount of takes for Mr. P, say 2 or 3. With Andy, we'd have anywhere from 10 to 12 takes, just because we were trying to get to Andy. So getting that back into the edit, that took a lot of time to get through Andy's side of the stuff.
So, with that in mind, roughly how much footage would a normal indie film have? If an indie film was doing it just one person, quick conversation, 1 minute out there, and then done, like you say, roughly how much footage would a normal indie film be if it was that sort of concept for them to edit for, say, a 1.5 hour film? Roughly how much footage?
Well, like I say, I mean, if we did this film, the same film, and you played one of the characters and we had someone else playing the other character, we'd set up a lot of those scenes as a 2-shot or a wide shot, film it, make sure we got a clean take of it, do a little bit of coverage if we needed it, maybe 1 or 2 takes just so we could cut in on a close-up. So
you're looking at maybe getting about 15 minutes worth of footage, and you can cut that down to get to 1 minute. So for scenes with Andy and Mr. P, if you were to get a 1 minute scene, roughly how much footage are you having to go through? Are you looking about half an hour or?
In excess, yeah.
In excess, yeah. So that's one of the reasons, rather than having about 15 minutes worth of footage to look through and cut down, you've got maybe 45 to an hour's worth of footage, and you've got even obviously more then to
absolutely
to across. So that's,
like I said, like any other film that you watch, you wouldn't normally cut every single time there was an exchange. I mean, sometimes you'd see that, but normally there might be, you stay on a 2-shot for 2 or 3 lines, cut to a close-up, back to the 2-shot for a few more lines. With Unworst Enemy, in the editing, we had absolutely there was no way to do it other than every single exchange to cut between Andy and Mr. P. So again, that's an added kind of time involvement. That's another reason why it's taking so long to build up these scenes. Another thing is when we're constructing these scenes in the edit, because these scenes never existed before, if that makes sense. Like when you do like a normal film,
I know what you mean.
so you got you will have experienced this. You've got 2 or 3 actors. You rehearse the scene. You know all the beats. You know what the chemistry is. You know what the dynamic is. You know what the pacing is. You know what the timing is. And so you'll have at the very least a couple of guide shots when you're back in the edit, so that you know what that scene's supposed to be like. With Almost Enemy, because Mike had never acted with Mike, we didn't have any guide shots, any guide scenes or anything. They were never kind of rehearsed in that way. We'd obviously rehearsed the script, but we'd never rehearsed it to the point where we knew what the timings were and the pacing and everything like that. So when we got it back to the edit, it wasn't just a case of finding the right performances. It was also a case of working out every single line, what the timing of that was, what the pace of the scene was.
We had some help on that though, because we had other people coming in, and say during a scene I would be playing Andy, you'd have another actor who was there at the time reading off playing Mr. P.
So that was to help give you cues. But in terms of the timing of the script, that didn't help at all, because we weren't able to have you overlap in any way with the person reading the script, because the sound guys would say don't overlap. So like normally, like if me and you were talking in a scene, we'd be talking over each other. We'd be
talking like this.
We couldn't do that when we were shooting. So even though we had people acting against you, feeding you the lines, in terms of the timing and the pacing and stuff, that wasn't there. Interesting side point about when we're doing that, their interpretation of the scene wasn't necessarily your interpretation of the other side of the scene as well. So even when we were running through and we had someone else doing the other character, we still didn't know how the scene was going to be, because the person being Andy at that point wasn't Mike's Andy, and the person being Mr. P when Mike was Andy wasn't Mike's version of Mr. P.
One of your favourite bits when we had a lovely gentleman called Ivor.
Big shout out to Ivor.
Yes, Ivor. Who read in for Mr. P at one point. And there's Andy being all submissive, and I think Mr. P at one point goes something like, "Oh, fuck you," aggressive. But of course there's Ivor, and he's going, "Oh, fuck you."
I think
quite interesting to play up emotionally.
Yes. I think my favourite line of his was when he called Andy a selfish twat. Just that in Ivor's voice, that was
you selfish twat.
Yes, it was pretty much like that. Whereas Mr. P would be like,
"Oh, you selfish twat."
So there is a sort of another version of a lot of these scenes where we could probably cut together Ivor's side of the conversation.
Oh yeah, definitely. Just do with Ivor's voice.
Yeah, we might do that for a laugh at some point. Obviously, that's not a priority. We want to get the actual film done. But so yeah, like I said, there wasn't ever a point with the Andy and Mr. P scenes where we knew until these scenes started to go together in the edit what the dynamic or the scenes were going to be like. So that was an additional challenge while editing that you wouldn't normally have.
It's probably one of our better scenes was in the film right at the start. It's the conversations I had with Matt Waters, who played Perry, because we went through the whole rehearsal process and fed off each other and
absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean that's certainly like my favourite to edit, because it was there compared to the others.
And of course, we both work. For you, what else do you do during the day?
Yeah, I feel quite lucky that my day job is within film and TV, but unfortunately, my day job is an editor. So I spend my whole entire life in post-production. So I edit commercials, shorts, promos, feature documentaries, and being freelance, I might do that up to 6 days a week. So whenever I get any free time or the weekends and stuff, the thought of doing more editing is it's a little bit daunting. So it does take a lot of motivation on my part to to do more editing. So that's another reason why it's set back.
Let alone managing the time to edit this film, you also took the time to script it.
Yes.
And so, talk about some of your influences into, well, you as a filmmaker and your influences in making this script.
My favourite period of filmmaking is the
indie filmmaking.
Filmmaking in general as
well.
Fair enough. Is the early 90s American indie filmmakers, when you had Quentin Tarantino coming out with Reservoir Dogs, Kevin Smith with Clerks, Robert Rodriguez with El Mariachi, Richard Linklater with Slacker. I've always been really inspired by low budget filmmakers and filmmakers that just kind of want to work outside the box, really. So me and you made a film back in, well, it was released in 2009 called 1 Minute. That's how we met.
Yes.
And again, that was another exhausting experience. And after we'd finished,
just meeting it, knackered me out.
After we'd finished that, I didn't really want to do another film, pretty much ever. We did a few shorts here and there, but I didn't really have much of an interest in doing another feature project.
1 Minute is a whole new film experience which we may cover on a podcast sometime in the future.
I hope we do, yeah.
But if you were struggling for motivation, what brought you back to wanting to make West Enemy?
Well, like I said, I'm really inspired by people, low budget filmmakers who just take it upon themselves to make a film against the odds, whatever they can get their hands on to make a film, do it. I look beyond the sort of the rough edges of a film. It's not so important to me to have a really glossy film. Just the concept of the film, the idea of the film, the behind the scenes, knowing that people have just got what they can together to make it. I love all that kind of thing. And so just by chance, I think I stumbled across this British filmmaker called Mike Henry, who I think this was his third feature-length film, which he'd made for £500, and he was promoting it on Twitter. He was releasing the DVD of it. So I bought a copy of him, and it was really good. It didn't look like £1 million movie, but it certainly didn't look like a £500 movie. And I just kind of thought, well, if he had £500 to make that film, what if we had, say, £5,000? What could we do with that? So from that, I got more inspired to see if we could do another film. I was also approaching 30, so this was a kind of it was
midlife crisis moment.
Yeah, sort of end of the 20s. Like, oh god, okay, let's have one more stab at this. So I was thinking back on old ideas that I had, and there was one that stuck out that would work very well as a low budget indie film.
Yeah.
Which was the idea of this man who was so crazy that his imaginary friend had an imaginary friend. That was the basis of Home West Enemy. And so I'd got like a very rough outline of what this film was, but it wasn't too clear. But I'd also had, when I was at uni, I'd made obviously loads of short films, and for me, with the films I made at university, was I really liked the ideas. I thought the ideas were the best part, but the films themselves weren't necessarily standout films. They weren't the sort of films where I'd probably want to put them online, but I still thought that there was something that could be salvaged from the ideas of those films. One of those films was about a guy who had a leaky roof, and the weather woman was predicting bad weather, and he was convinced that it was all her fault, and she was deliberately predicting bad weather, and he had a voice in his head who told him that if he killed this weather woman, then the weather would change. And so it's slightly different from what we did in Home West Enemy. He does go out and he kills the weather woman, and lo and behold, the weather changes. But it goes from one extreme to the other. And then I did another film about, this is so long ago, this is when sort of videos were being phased out in favour of DVD.
Middle Ages.
Yeah. So, but I was, at the time, I really, and I still think this, I think there's some films that should be watched on video, like Video Nasty's Evil Dead and that kind of film. I think, what's the point of watching that in high def with great sound? You want to watch a rubbish quality version of the films like The Evil Dead.
So indie films lend themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the idea within that film was these two guys were having an argument between what was better, DVD and video. And have we put this scene out? I think we might put this scene out where Andy strangles Perry.
Yes, that's right. We have, yes.
With the videotape. So essentially that's how the conflict between those two guys within the short film that I made resolved itself. So within like those three basic ideas, I kind of felt like the main character was the same sort of character.
Yeah.
And so I just thought about trying to mesh those ideas together, and they work surprisingly well. I was working on it for a while, a few months here and there, and I think me and you went to see Prometheus.
We did, yes.
And I mentioned it to you then. You seemed a bit underwhelmed by the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I think we almost built ourselves up because it was obviously the precursor.
Oh no, I'm not talking about Prometheus. I'm talking about when I told you about it. So around the October 2012,
yeah.
I'd got a 65-page script. I think it was about 65 pages, and that's when I gave it to you.
Yeah.
What did you think when you'd? Because it wasn't what it is.
No.
Now
no.
The first act and the third act are exactly the same. The second act went through a lot of transformation. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But so when you read it, when I sent it to you, what did you think? When I said, "Can you do both of these roles?"
Straight away, I was like, "Okay." that was generally what I thought. But I felt very privileged. You'd asked me. Look, the first thing that was going through. Phil wants me to do both of these. Oh my God, Phil wants me to do. Yes, I'd love to do. Before even reading the script,
Yeah.
but then when I got to reading the script, I realised just how much of me was actually in this, and realised that straight away I'm going to have to do a lot of work on this. And you expressed that straight away that the one thing you want to do is get these two characters down. You wanted them separated. You wanted them very distinctive. Now, Mr. P was, I think, the first one we worked on because he tended to be the easiest one. He was.
He's your kind of go-to.
Yeah.
character.
Yes. Not that I'm saying I play serial killers of that sort of very well. I'm a very nice person. I stroke bunnies and stuff. I'm known to. Let's just get that out there. Anyway, but you wanted a very distinct difference between both him and Andy. And one of the things you specified, I remember very much about Andy, is now I'm 6'2", and for Mr. P that's ideal. He's big, he's got this towering presence, but for Andy he's almost the antithesis. He has to be a very lowly, very very weak, somebody you can easily manipulate. And so we did that with a physical thing. You wanted me really to bend down, be really low, speak to people from a very, almost like a puppy looking up with a begging sort of
eye
eyes.
contact.
Eye contact was
possible.
Yeah, he could make he'd be one of these people who could make eye contact from a corridor, but as he approached you, his eyes would go further and further down to the floor and looking at people. I think one of the things we did straight away was to rehearse and get the script into my head.
We did, yeah. So I think from that point we met up maybe once or twice a week, or maybe every other week or something, and we'd to start with, we'd just run through the script. So I'd be Andy and you'd be Mr. P, so we'd run through the script as that, and then we'd swap roles and run through the script again. And that whole kind of process of us rehearsing the script was really beneficial for me, because it meant that we could sort of establish any kind of weak spots or bits that need to be tighter or longer. I think the first act is pretty much as it was scripted at the very beginning, and the same with the third act as well, and most of the second act. But the second act, when we were kind of going through it, it became obvious it was very repetitive. It was the same thing kept happening over and over again. So there were two kind of major changes that we did. I think one of them is in a clips that we've put out, so I don't mind mentioning it. It's when Mr. P makes Andy believe that Andy was the imaginary friend. So that was a nice kind of twist to begin with. So the other major change was Mr. P was always sort of getting one over on Andy, and I thought, well, it would be good if we gave Andy the chance to get one over on Mr. P for a change. And so once we did that, there's a nice big sort of 15-minute chunk that came out of that, which is probably my favourite bit of the script. It flows really well, it works really well. It's a good mixing up of that concept before we hit the third act. That process of me and you going through the script was really helpful. It swelled from 65 pages to 110 pages. Which is, I probably should have known at that point. That was probably a bit too long for an indie. I probably should have tried to get it down to 90.
So you gave copies of the script not just to me, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You gave it to other people. But why do something like that?
But one of the things that I'm not interested in when I give people copies of scripts or my rough cuts of films and stuff, I'm not interested in people telling me if it's good or not.
Wonderful person,
yeah, exactly. I don't care. That's not helpful. So there's two people who get all of my scripts, all of the rough cuts of films. I send them to a lot of people, but there's two people in particular. Paul Barrow, who's in the film.
Shout out to Paul.
And Nusha Amini. And those two, I know that they'll give me honest feedback. Good, constructive criticism. And I won't necessarily always take their thoughts, but I know that they're not, going, oh yeah, that's really...
And if you've got two, if both of them come up with a single thing about a certain line, a certain bit of the script, you know that they're probably both talking the truth. One of the other things we did as well is, I think we mentioned it before, we had a great rehearsal with Matt, who plays Perry.
Yeah, he was really great. He came from London for the day, came up to Birmingham to meet us. We hadn't met him before that, and we went through how many scenes has he got? 3 or 4 scenes. So we went through all of his scenes, and it was really good to do that. Because like I said, before that, it would just been me and you rehearsing. I'm not an actor, so just to see myself, two people bouncing off each other with the script, it was great.
It was nice. It was very fun.
So I think that's enough from me gabbing on about how West Enemy was conceived and came about. Next time, I guess we'll talk about the pre-production process.
Yeah.
What about other indie scripts? What do you like?
Scripts, well, a particular indie film that I saw come out in the 90s, which I thought was just amazing, was Bryan Singer's The Usual Suspects. Came out in about it was 1995, I believe. It premiered at Sundance in 95. Was also screened at Cannes. And if I remember correctly, the film also won 2 Oscars for Best Supporting Actor and Best Screenplay. Written by Christopher McQuarrie, who's also been a writer on other films like Valkyrie, Jack Reacher, Jack and the Giants Lair, Mission Impossible, of course, Rogue Nation. He's even directed Rogue Nation as well, and the Jack Reacher film.
And like you said, he won an Oscar for this script. This put him on the map.
Yeah, definitely. Apparently there's even been a Bollywood remake.
Oh God! Okay.
Of The Usual Suspects. If you ever get the chance, check it out. Sorry, there'll be a reason for me saying that. Apparently, it's called Chocolate: Deep Dark Secrets. It obviously does sound like a Bollywood porn film, but
the Bollywood do.
Well, they do now. It's called Chocolate: Deep Dark Secrets. Try the salted caramel.
So what is about Usual Suspects that you like? What makes it a good script for you?
Well, for me, one of the things I liked a lot about a script is the sense that these characters seem very freeing in their conversations. There was no eulogising to camera or the big sort of things you see in a lot of budget films. I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing it for love. I'm doing it for the country. No, there wasn't. There was typical speak. There was lots of bouncing off each other. There didn't seem to be any general leader in the group. So there was a definite edginess to every part of this. One of the other things I also liked about it is this was a crime film. Yeah. But it was about the criminals, something you rarely saw at that time. It was all about the detective doing the solving in a lot of films. I mean, just before this, you had like Die Hard, the edgy cop defeating the bad guys, or Lethal Weapon, the edgy cop, the partner defeating the bad guys. This time, it was about the bad guys. Yeah.
To be fair, I think Tarantino probably got in there with Reservoir
Oh
Dogs.
yeah, and he started that whole thing off. Bryan Singer took that concept and turned it into a film noir. Yeah. And really put a good mysterious edge on it. This was proper edge of the seat testing your mind. And I don't know of anyone who figured out the ending when they saw it and had to rewatch it to see if they'd been caught out. Very, very good.
Yeah, what's interesting rewatching it, I think, is when you know that this is like a story that Verbal Kint is spinning, you kind of wonder, is any of this true? Like, the whole film the whole story that he's telling the detective could just be complete nonsense.
And then that's turned on its head again with the very last scene where you see the lawyer turn up to collect him. And then you think, well, he's got to have some part of it, but then what part was real, what part is not? So yes, the whole film could have been completely made up, which ironically it was. For us to be scripted in such a way that you feel like you have to go back and rewatch it to justify it is a great credit to the film.
Absolutely. I guess the stand-up moments for people with the usual suspects is like the twist ending and things like that. But is there anything kind of within there that sticks out for you?
Yeah. One of the things I liked was his use of montage editing throughout the film, and one particular scene summed that up. The idea of montage editing is that the audience feed their own ideas into the film and come up with the ideas. The classic one was the scene itself shows a plane taking off, a jumbo jet taking off from an airport. That's it. You don't get the name of the plane, you get the name of the airport, just the plane taking off from the airport. The sound in the background is from Agent Kuyan leaving a voicemail on his phone saying, I will be out at the out of the country at the time, or I'll be out at home at the time, please leave a message.
Out of the state,
By using montage editing, by editing these two together, the audience feed into the concept that Agent Kuyan is on this plane going somewhere. That is the belief that the audience create. Yet all that's happened is you've seen a plane taking off and a voicemail playing. And for that is an excellent use of montage editing and an excellent use of indie film budgeting. You don't have to show the whole journey. You don't have to show where he's going. You just create these two very simple concepts, and you've created something for the audience to latch onto.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think probably if they had a bigger budget, you would have seen him stroll through the airport.
Yeah, you'd have seen the name of the airport. You'd have seen
sitting
him
in his seat,
and get the concept of what Agent Kuyan's all about.
Yeah.
Here, didn't need that. Bang, one scene. It took less than 15 seconds to see, and the audience have got the concept immediately.
Great scene.
So that for me is one of my films that I really enjoy. Phil, can you give us a film?
Yeah, sure. So we mentioned it just before, Clerks. For me, Clerks is a really great example of a script for a film written around what the director had access to, as opposed to writing a script and then having to find all those elements. So Kevin Smith, he worked in this convenience store during the day, and he got permission from the shop owner to film there during the night while it was closed, and so he built that script around the convenience store, and he hired his friends and he hired local actors, and I think really the only thing that he would need to spend money on was film stock and equipment. So yeah, to me that's really the quintessential no budget kind of filmmaking approach. What have you got available? Let's write a script around that. So yeah, for that reason, I think it's great. And then on top of that, it's just a really kind of funny, warm script as well. I think, yeah.
Some things which are very distinctive. The lead character scribbling on the corrugated front, "We are open." You can't open it because the bubblegum stuck in the thing.
Do you know why that was? Again, this was written into the script because they were shooting at night.
Yeah.
And the shutters at the very front of the store would have shown, because the whole film takes place during the course of the day, so a big chunk of it should have been daylight outside. So he had to have the shutters down the whole time.
Yeah.
So he wrote into the script that someone had jammed gum into the locks on the shutters, so they had to be down all day. So there you go. That was just another example of working around a problem, but with a sort of a funny result as well, because it's not, you would never have thought it was just like that.
Work,
and in a funny way as well.
Yeah. One of my favourite scenes which I've seen from it is when this lady walks into the store next door, which is the video section where his friend works, and she wants to order a certain video. She's got a baby with her, and she wants to order a video.
Yeah.
And she asks you, and he's on the phone. He says, "Yeah, sure, we order videos." And she goes, "I'd like to order," and it was something like
Happy Scrappy Hero Pops or something.
It was something along those lines. And he goes, "Yeah, sure." And as he's on the phone, he then continues his phone conversation. "Hi, this is blah 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 film. I'd like to order," and then just reels off about 8 or 10 really explicit pornographic film titles. And then right at the end he goes, oh yeah, and one more. What was it? But what for you is one of your favourite scenes?
Well, what I really like, I think it's sort of really overdone these days, the sort of pop culture referencing.
Oh yeah.
But way back in the early 90s, I think, you know, Tarantino had a head start with his Madonna speech in Reservoir Dogs and stuff. And you've got examples before Stand By Me, them talking about the cartoon characters and stuff like that. But really, there wasn't too much sort of... Like, pop culture is a thing now. And pop culture referencing, back in the early 90s, there wasn't really that kind of thing. And
it was just like a tribute to acknowledging something.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got things like Stranger Things, which references virtually everything. But going back, your favourite scene?
Yeah, so it's the scene where they're talking about the construction workers on the second Death Star and whether they were kind of innocent people who were, you know, a lot of people kind of reference Star Wars in a really obvious way, and I just thought this was really kind of funny just to kind of go really in depth into thinking about, you know, the lives of the construction workers of the second Death Star and how, you know, they were innocent sort of bystanders as such to, you know, being blown up. One of the kind of weird things from that, you know, in Attack of the Clones, there's these sort of bug creatures that are sort of like big. It turns out in the film that these are the guys who drew up the plans for the original Death Star.
Oh yes, I remember. You saw a scene at one point where you've got the blueprint of the Death Star in holographic form, and he closes it down.
And so on the audio commentary to Attack of the Clones, George Lucas is talking about this, and he's going, oh yeah, so as it turns out it was actually these bugs who came up with the Death Star, so Kevin Smith and Jane Silent Bob needn't worry about is he serious? Did he actually, like, you know, take serious concern from what he said in Clerks and actually sort of change
it back to the film?
So I think that's one of my favourite scenes, just because it's such a weird kind of take on Star Wars, and it's just, you know, funny. What about films that aren't so good?
Well, there was one, and I remember this for all different reasons. When you asked me to try and think of indie films in particular that I didn't think have done really well, one that immediately came to mind is the film Boxing Helena. Also came out in the 90s.
Yes.
Very, very strange film. It was a film that only really entered into people's consciousness and struck any sort of interest with people was that there was a massive lawsuit around it. It was big news at the time. Kim Basinger, who was due to play the female lead in the film, pulled out just, I think it was pre-production. Don't know the reasons why, but the film pretty much made its money back and then some by suing her for $9 million for dropping out as early as she did.
How much was the budget of the film?
Well, I'm not sure, but it certainly wasn't $9 million. I mean, if you look at the cast's not littered with stars, even for the 90s. I mean, we've got Gillian Sands, who plays the main male lead, and of course Kim Basinger was supposed to be the other selling point. It was now taken by an unknown actress known as Sherilyn Fenn. There were other actors in Bill Paxton who had done bit parts during the 90s, especially in Terminator, Commando, things like that. But, I mean, they had Art Garfunkel, as in Simon Garfunkel, who played one of the doctors in it as well. So it wasn't a hugely well-known cast. It didn't even get a UK cinema release here because it didn't do so well in America. But the idea of the film was that there was this doctor who was so obsessed with this model that he'd met, Gillian Sands played the doctor. In order to keep her and maintain her beauty, throughout the film, removes her limbs. And because he's a doctor who's an expert at it, he starts off by removing arms and legs and literally boxing Helena. Yes, it's a film that produces high hilarity amongst several people. But one of the other reasons I remember, and this was a scene from the film, I just remember, because there was so little action in it and of course so little drama, that about halfway through the film she has a chance to escape the house that she's been kept in. And she hasn't got any arms at this point. So she's running through the house to the front door to try and get out. And the thing that struck me more than anything was, why didn't he remove her legs first? If you want to keep someone and you plan to remove their limbs, remove the legs. Mm-hmm. He wanted Helena to become dependent on him. Mm-hmm. So remove the legs. And you can virtually box her quite nicely, and then remove the arms after that. But it was that sort of film that just made you go, huh? But yeah, that was a disappointing one, which is a shame really, because it was directed by the daughter of David Lynch, Jennifer Lynch. So great things were expected. But, no, not really. I think it even won a Razzie as well at the time. But that's the film for me that I think more disappointed me more. I thought there might be something more to it. What about you, Phil? What film? What indie film for you is not rated standards to the height you would have liked?
There's a film that I actually really like on the whole, but there is problems with the script that I think let it down, and that's the Stanford Prison Experiment from 2015, which is directed by Carl Patrick Alvarez. It's based on the real-life experiment that was carried out at Stanford University by Philip Zimbardo, I think, in the early 70s. Have you heard of...
I've heard of the experiment, yes.
So the experiment itself, he got together a group of young men who agreed to be part of this experiment for a 2 to 3 week period, and he basically split them into guards and prisoners. Yeah. And it didn't take any time at all for the guards to sort of really take on this really authoritarian approach to their role, and sort of pretty much straight away began to sort of essentially torture and humiliate the prisoners. Yeah. In turn, the prisoners had this sort of victim mentality and became very submissive, and just sort of assumed this was supposed to be happening to them, until it got to the point where they, got to breaking point. And they revolted, and the experiment had to be ended early. And so there's been a couple of films made that are loosely based on the experiment. One from the early 2000s, Das Experiment, which is a German film. And then there was an American remake of that film in 2010 with Adrian Brody and Forrest Whitaker. It wasn't as good. Like I said, they were loosely based on this experiment. In those film versions, they take it a bit far. People getting murdered, and the humiliation is kind of really over the top. So this 2015 film is based really closely on the experiment itself. And like I said, I do really like the film. It's got a great cast. The acting's amazing. That's one of the best things about it. And on the whole, the script is quite funny and harrowing. But where it lets itself down is it sticks far too close to the actual events. Oh, right. It goes beat for beat. What happened in the actual events happen in the film. And you know how when people adapt books or make films on real life events, there's always people criticising them for deviating too far away. This is certainly a case where they definitely should have taken a few artistic licenses, I think. You don't really get a sense of this heightening tension, and when it all sort of collapses, it's over a very minor event, which you can imagine happening in real life, because it's the case of the straw breaking the camel's back. Yes. Within a sort of a 3-act film over a 2-hour period, you need a sort of escalating, heightening sense of things going awry. So that's one of the things that just doesn't work for this film. Yeah. It should have mixed up the order of events possibly, and had the more extreme things happening be the last bits of humiliation that really kind of wound people up. To the climax. Absolutely. The other thing which I find really, really strange that they've done with this film is you're introduced to Philip Zimbardo. He's the guy running the experiment, and he observes this via video. And then you've got your guards, and you've got your prisoners. There's probably maybe 12 on each side, so obviously you're not going to get introduced to every single one of those guys. So you get introduced to, say, about 3 of the guards. There's 3 main guards, and in the beginning there's 2 main prisoners, and they're played by, Ezra Miller. He's the new Flash in the DC films. Yeah. From the indie world, he came from a film called After School, and his breakthrough role was We Need to Talk About Kevin. The other prisoner, played by Ty Sheridan, who he got his indie break in a film called Mud with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah,
but most recently, we know him from Ready Player One. He's Wade Watts.
Yeah.
And those two guys are great.
Yeah.
They're great in the film. And those are really the only two prisoners that you're introduced to. And for some bizarre reason, they both leave halfway through the film. So about 50 minutes into the film, Ezra Miller's character leaves.
Right.
10 minutes later, Ty Sheridan's character leaves. So you've lost your two main protagonists. I don't understand why they didn't have a third prisoner who we could have followed all the way through.
Yeah.
Or just make one of the two who left a minor character. Normally you'd have a main character, wouldn't you, who you'd follow through this ordeal.
Yeah.
But
you need somebody for the audience to tag on to.
Yeah.
Really.
And there's another hour of the film where you don't have a main character to follow or root for, and it really, really screws the film. And they do kind of bring in a new prisoner to replace them, but you're too far into the film to care about this guy, and you don't know the other prisoners enough to care about them. So I just found it really odd.
Yeah, it's a bit strange to say the least, but it's still a film you recommend seeing for different reasons.
Yeah, for the performances alone, I definitely recommend it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a film worth checking out.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we should do that. Maybe we should do that more in the future.
Yeah.
Come up with several recommendations for other films to watch. So, for the sake of this episode, what recommendations do you suggest?
I mentioned him before, Mike Henry, who made I Work for £500. I don't think that's available, but on his website, which I think is quandaryproductions.com, he's got 3 of his feature films, which are made on a very low budget. They're free to view. So
excellent.
Yeah, so if you want to head over to his website, check out what he does. He did, I think, 4 features in 5 years. Which,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's covered everything in this podcast.
I think so.
So next episode we're going to talk about the pre-production for Own Worst Enemy, how the casting went. We'll cover more on that. We covered a little bit about Matt Waters, but we'll cover other aspects as well. Location hunting, finding the props and set that we needed, which involved road trips, epic road trips and all sorts. And that will lead us on to casting in other movies. Good castings, castings that never happened were due to. A bit like the Kim Basinger one for Boxing Helena, and obviously bad casting, where some people just didn't fit just to name any Steven Seagal film. But get in touch with us. We'd love to hear your recommendations for films as well, things that, and other things you'd like us to cover. Whether it be stuff to cover about Own Worst Enemy in the conception that we didn't cover this episode, or stuff you'd like us to cover in the future regarding scripts or the production itself. The best places to get in touch with us are on our website, which is ownworstenemymovie.com, on Twitter, which is under Own Worst Enemy UK, the Instagram page, which is Philm Maker, that's PHILM_MAKER, and our Facebook page. Put in a search for Own Worst Enemy Movie and you'll find us that way as well.
Yep. Let us know how we're doing as well.
Yeah, let us know about the podcast. Feedback for the podcast is very important. Things that you think we babble on too much about, and things you'd love for us to include in the future. So that is a big thank you to everyone out there, and this is a goodbye from me, Mike.
Yes, thank you very much.
And that is a goodbye from Phil. Thank you very much.